Okay, what we've done, we've taken off the thermostat that controls the gas fireplace. And so now, obviously, we have a repair. A repair like this is actually quite simple, but it can be really intimidating for somebody who hasn't done it before, because there's a hole, there's a piece of drywall missing. And you might be even thinking, well, do I need to go out and buy some drywall? Or how am I going to fill that and protect that? And what about these little plastic anchor things? Do I try to pull them out or pound them in? What do I do? I'm going to show you how simple it is to take care of. The first thing I'm going to do is actually remove these little plastic anchors. And what usually works for me is I just hit it with my taping knife and it knocks the edge off, right off of it. And then you can just tap it in. And that's all you really have to do with those. But the hole itself has got some, loose paper. So I'm going to cut that off. Just going to remove all that loose paper. And then once again, I'm just going to kind of tap round those edges in a little bit to make it as flat as possible. These are some things you can use to actually do this repair. This is fiberglass mesh tape. It's self-adhesive. It's pretty strong tape. What I like to use a lot of times is a tape that's a little bit stronger. This is actually extra strength. You can see it's a little wider. It's got some cross hashes on it for the fiberglass mesh, and it's a little stronger. And that'll work really well. And let me show you how this works on this repair. Because it's nice and wide, all I really have to do is put it right over the hole, press it in place really tight with my fingers, but right where the actual hole is, I like to push it in slightly with my fingers. And if I run my hand across, I can feel a little indentation. I didn't need to pre-fill that because the joint compound is going to go right through this mesh and fill that hole. So that's actually a very good way to fix this type of hole. But I want to show you something else today. What I have here are the aluminum patches. They're self-adhesive patches. This is kind of a small hole, but it's still going to work great to show you how well these things work. This particular pack has 3 patches. This is a smaller one, I guess it's about 4 inches by 4 inches. And it is aluminum. It's very thin aluminum, but it's also sticky. Just like the fiberglass mesh tape, it's self-adhesive. So this would just simply go right over that hole. And you press it in place. I like to actually take my taping knife to push it in really tight and make sure there's no wrinkles or the aluminum hasn't got a dent or a little ripple in it that's going to show through later. So it's nice and flat. You can see how solid it is. And you can still see that when I put compound over it, it'll go right through the mesh and the aluminum and the fiberglass as well and fill that hole. I'm going to use the dust control compound because this is the only repair I'm doing in this house. And I want to contain the dust to this area, not have to cover this whole living room to eliminate dust from settling every place. All right, the compound I'm going to use, it's a pre-mixed compound, so it's an air drying type compound, but it's a dust control joint compound. A very workable compound, a very sandable compound, but the dust is a little heavier and it settles. Instead of floating in the air and landing on something 20 feet away, it pretty much settles all in this area. And I haven't added any water to it. The consistency was exactly what I was looking for, because when you're doing a repair like this, you don't want real thin compound. You want something that's something that's easier to work with. And a real thin, loose compound is harder to smooth and harder to actually put on the surface. So that's a good, pretty stiff mix, but that's perfect. So I put a little on my knife, and the first thing I'm going to do is try to fill that slight indentation, that slight hole. So I'm just pushing it right in. So I'm pretty sure I've got a lot of compound through that hole. Now I'm going to start concealing it. keep in mind, it's going to take more than one coat to make this perfect. So I'm going to enlarge it, but now I've got plenty of compound on there. Now I'm going to start smoothing it out. So I'm going to cut in the edges so they're nice and tight. See how I don't have an edge anymore? I'm doing the same thing around the whole repair. Now I'm just going to pull my knife across. And I can see that I would like it just a slight bit wider. So I'm going to put a little more compound around the perimeter, the knife across. And you're not going to be able to get it perfect. My goal here is to have it nicely feathered in and not built up too heavy in the middle. So that's actually not too bad for the first coat. So what's going to happen is, once this dries, we're going to lightly sand it to get rid of the tool marks and maybe to feather the edges in a little bit more. And then we're going to put another coat of compound over it. All right, this is a repair that we did yesterday. It's nice and dry. If you remember, we put the little square aluminum self-adhesive patch on here. And I feathered it out really nice. It's actually feeling really flat. But I do have quite a few tool marks. So I'm just taking a sanding pad with a pretty fine grit. And I'm just going to sand it lightly. If you remember, this was the joint compound that was dust control. Matter of fact, let's try and get a shot right here, Chuck, of the dust falling down. Let's see if it actually falls straight down. You can see the larger chunks coming off of that, how they're not really becoming airborne, they're just falling to the ground. That's what makes this a dust control compound. They're heavier, they're not floating around in the air like you get out of a normal compound. I kind of want to see how much of a bump I have there. Because remember, one of the reasons a patch or repair shows is because you've created a little bit of a bump. And now with this type of lighting, the cross lighting will create a little bit of a shadow. So we want to minimize that bump. So I'm just going to take this very straight taping knife and just hold it over that. And you can actually see. I can actually see it rocking. And from this side, come over on this side, Chuck, because we got that shadow. I think you'll be able to see the light coming right through. So that is a bump. So that means I want to feather this out larger. I want to blend this in to a large area as opposed to just being happy with what I have and just trying to conceal that. So I'm going to add a little bit more compound and make the whole repair a little wider. So I'm just going to put the same compound that I used before. I'm going to make it larger. So the goal here is to enlarge the area, but still keep it very thin in the middle, because that's where the bump is. So I'm bringing it out probably 4 or 5 inches wider or more around the whole perimeter. Getting plenty of compound on there. Now I'm just going to take my 6-inch knife and smooth that outside edge right in nice and tight. This is something I always do first thing. Now I'm going to use a wider knife. Now I'm going to use a 12-inch taping knife. And right now all I'm doing is trying to get a feel for the repair. Trying to get a feel for how heavy I want to leave it. What I'm doing is pulling the knife across it pretty flat, because I don't really want to remove much compound. I'll start out with a clean knife and show you how little I think I'm going to be removing. So I did remove a little, but not that much. So I'm just going to keep going over it. And right now, as I pull the knife across, I'm trying to smooth it in the middle, or remove it in the middle. Keep it as thin as possible along the very center. So I'm pretty happy with how I have it in the center. Now I'm just going to try to blend it in just a little bit better. Now, what's happening here is because I'm leaving a little more compound than I normally do on my finish coat, I'm getting some bubbles. Some bubbles are coming through the compound. This is a very common occurrence when you're doing repairs over a painted surface. What this means is, if I keep going over it, those bubbles are going to keep coming back. So if I leave it like this and sand it, I'll probably have to put another tight coat over the top of it. But I learned a trick a few years ago that I'm going to leave this for like 10 minutes. I'm just going to walk away from it for 10 minutes. And then when I put another very thin coat over the top of that, the bubbles will disappear. At least that's what I hope happens. That's what you have to do. You have to just stand back and just let it take a little bit of a set, and I believe those bubbles will disappear. So that's what we're going to do. Oops. It's been at least 20 minutes since I applied this compound, and obviously the bubbles are still there. I'm not just going to go right into it with my taping knife. I'm going to put some compound, another very thin layer of compound over this, and then I'm just going to smooth it. I'm not necessarily doing this because I want to build it up more. I just am doing this because that compound has started to take a little bit of a set, and I would get some drag. But I'm going to actually be removing most of the compound I just put in there. It's not looking too bad. I'm just going to take my smaller knife right now and feather these edges in a little better. All I'm going to do on this today, and tomorrow when this is dry, I'm going to sand it. And if I still do have a little bit of a problem with the air bubbles, I will have to put another very tight coat over the top of this, but that really won't require any sanding, just basically putting it on and taking it back off. One thing I want you to notice that what I did here was, remember the hole in the wall was probably like 1 inch diameter to start with. And now I've got this repair probably 22 inches in diameter. So that is done because I'm blending that into the surrounding area. One interesting thing about repairs is, let's say I am doing this for a customer, right? So I've got this completed and I paint it and everything. And if I don't feather it out well enough or hide it with the right primers and the right paints, the homeowner is going to come home and they're not going to just walk into the room and observe this wall from 10 feet away. They're most likely going to walk up and they're going to be like, oh, I don't know. You know, they're looking at it from this angle. They're going to be like, you know, I can still see that. So that's another reason to blend it into this larger area. All right, this is all nice and dry. It's ready to sand. All I'm using is a sponge sander. It's a pretty fine grit. I don't really know the grit of it, but it's probably like a 120, which is what you want, because keep in mind, these compounds are quite soft. All the finished compounds we use are very soft. So I just want to make sure that the edges are all feathered in really well. You don't have to do that first, but as you know, that's what I like to do. I like to get my edges all feathered in. I'm all happy with that. See how it just blends right into the paint? Now I'm just going to work it across the middle. You'll also notice that we have very good lighting. It's important when you're sanding to have really good lighting, cross lighting like we have here, because that allows me to see any little ripples or tool marks. And without the good lighting, you wouldn't be able to see. This is another example of how well that dust control compound works. You can really see it's really kind of like chunks, and it's all just coming right down. It's really not flying back in my face. And there, that's it. Ready for primer and paint.